So today we are going to get started on lesson 15 of the Call of the Wild. Our standards are RL 8.3 and RL 8.4. Today we are going to begin reading chapter 4 of the Call of the Wild, and we are going to analyze how incidents in the text provoke characters to make decisions and reveal new insight into Buck's character. So these are the things you're going to need: your book, your vocab chart, your incident chart, notebook paper, mainly notebook paper because I don't think your Learn Zillion or workbook provides you with enough pages for your incident chart or your vocab chart. So just make sure you also have notebook paper. All right, so we are going to, I want you to follow along in chapter 4 as I read on page 71. We're starting on page 71. Chapter 4. Who is one to mastership? A. What I say? I speak true when I say dat Buck two devils. This was Francois' speech next morning when he discovered Spitz missing and Buck covered with wounds. He drew him to the fire and by its light pointed them out. Dat Spitz fight like a devil, said Perrault, as he surveyed the gaping rips and cuts. Dat Buck fight like two devils, was Francois' answer. And now we made good time. No more Spitz, no more trouble, sure. While Perrault packed the camp outfit and loaded the sled, the dog driver proceeded to harness the dogs. Buck trotted up to the place Spitz would have occupied as leader, but Francois, not noticing him, brought Solex to the coveted position. In his judgment, Solex was the best lead dog left. Buck sprang upon Solex in a fury, driving him back and standing in his place. Eh? Francois cried, slapping his thighs gleefully. Look at that Buck. Him kill that Spitz, him think to take the job. Go away, kook, he cried, but Buck refused to budge. He took Buck by the scruff of the neck, and though the dog growled threateningly, dragged him to one side and replaced Solex. The old dog did not like it and showed plainly that he was afraid of Buck. Francois was obdurate, but when he turned his back, Buck again displaced Solex, who was not at all unwilling to go. Francois was angry. Now, by gar, I feex you, he cried, coming back with a heavy club in his hand. Buck remembered the man in the red sweater and retreated slowly. Nor did he attempt to charge in when Solex was once more brought forward, but he circled just beyond the range of the club, snarling with bitterness and rage. And while he circled, he watched the club so as to dodge it if thrown to Francois, for he as was become wise in the way of clubs. All right, so we just read this portion that is here in the gray. So let's look at the word that is bolded, obdurate. Obdurate. So we see in there a root word, dur, D-U-R. D-U-R. Dur. So the root word for that means durable. Durable. So what do you think obdurate means? Obdurate means not willing to change your opinion or the way you do something. Stubborn. Not willing to change your opinion or the way you do something. Stubborn. And that is an adjective. So now that we know what obdurate means, what is Francois obdurate about? What is he stubborn about? What does he not want to do? So Francois is obdurate. He is not willing to change his mind and let Buck be in the lead position. All right, let's move on. Page 73. We're on page 73. The driver went about his work, and he called to Buck when he was ready to put him in his old place in front of Dave. Buck retreated 2 or 3 steps. Francois followed him up, whereupon he again retreated. After some of this, Francois threw down the club, thinking that Buck feared a thrashing. But Buck was in open revolt. He wanted, not to escape a clubbing, but to have the leadership. It was his by right. He had earned it, and he would not be content with less. Perrault took a hand. Between them they ran him about for the better part of an hour. They threw clubs at him. He dodged. They cursed him and his fathers and mothers before him, and all his seed to come after him down to the remotest generation, and every hair on his body and drop of blood in his veins. And he answered curse with snarl and kept out of their reach. He did not try to run away, but retreated around and around the camp, advertising plainly that when his desire was met, he would come in and be good. Francois sat down and scratched his head. Perrault looked at his watch and swore. Time was flying, and they should have been on the trail an hour gone. Francois scratched his head again. He shook it and grinned sheepishly at the courier, who shrugged his shoulders in sign they were beaten. When Francois went up to where Solex stood and called to Buck, Buck laughed as dogs laugh, yet kept his distance. Francois unfastened Solex's traces and put him back in his old place. The team stood harnessed to the sled in an unbroken line, ready for the trail. There was no place for Buck save at the front. Once more Francois called, and once more Buck laughed and kept away. "Tro down de club," Perrault commanded. Francois complied, whereupon Buck trotted in, laughing triumphantly, and swung around in position at the head of the team. His traces were fastened, the sled broken out, and with both men running, they dashed out on the river trail. All right, so now we need to look at our incident chart. What actions does Buck take in response to Francois, and why? What was Francois just doing right then? What actions does Buck take in response to Francois, and why? Okay, so our incident is that Buck retreats when he's called to the harness. When Francois throws the club down, he still doesn't come because he is revolting against them for not allowing him to be the lead dog. Buck is saying, no, I want to be the lead. I've earned that position. I'm going to be the lead or we're not going anywhere. So what does this say about Buck? What is our observation about this? So far, we know that, they're obdurate about it. Francois is obdurate. Let's go on to the next incident, which is what? We know that Buck is refusing to get into his harness. So what do Francois and Perrault do to him? Right. So they start to throw clubs at him. So Buck, he continues to run, and he dodges the clubs from Perrault and Francois. This makes them angry. Eventually they sit down, and they're just like, we can't keep doing this. One's scratching their head, one's looking at the watch like we should have been gone a long time ago. All right. And then, after going through all of that, What do Perrault and Francois finally do? What do they finally do? Right, they give up, they move Solex, and place Buck in the lead position. They figure out what Buck wants. Figure out, all right, if we want to get anywhere, we've got to let him be the lead. So after having these incidents, what could our observations be? What could our observation be? We have that basically it seems like Buck was forcing them to make this decision. Buck was telling them, you have to make me the lead dog. You have to put me in the lead position. Because if you don't put me in this lead position, we're not leaving. What does this say about Buck's character? It shows that he's intelligent. He has the ability to reason, and he has an ability to act in ways so he can get what he wants. Absolutely. All right, let's move on. Page 75. Page 75. Highly as the dog driver had forevalued Buck with his 2 devils, he found, while the day was yet young, that he had undervalued. At a bound, Buck took up the duties of leadership, and where judgment was required and quick thinking and quick acting, he showed himself the superior even of Spitz, of whom Francois had never seen an equal. But it was in giving the law and making his mates live up to it that Buck excelled. Dave and Solex did not mind the change in leadership. It was none of their business. Their business was to toil mightily, in the traces, so long as that they were not interfered with. They did not care what happened. Billy, the good-natured, could lead for all they cared, so as long as he kept order. The rest of the team, however, had grown unruly during the last days of Spitz, and their surprise was great now that Buck proceeded to lick them into shape. Pike, who pulled at Buck's heels, and who never put an ounce more of his weight against the breastband than he was compelled to do, was swiftly and repeatedly shaken, for loafing, and ere the first day was done, he was pulling more than ever before in his life. The first night in camp, Joe, the sour one, was punished roundly, a thing that Spitz had never succeeded in doing. Buck simply smothered him by virtue of superior weight and cut him up till he ceased snapping and began to whine for mercy. The general tone of the team picked up immediately. It recovered its old-time solidarity, and once more the dogs leaped as one dog in the traces. At the Rink Rapids, 2 native huskies, Teak and Kuna, were added, and the celerity with which Buck broke them in took Francois's breath. "Never such dog as dat Buck," he cried. "No, never. Him worth $1,000 by gar. Eh? What you say, Perrault?" And Perrault nodded. He was ahead of the record then, gaining day by day. The trail was in excellent condition, well packed and hard, and there was no new fallen snow with which to contend. It was not too cold. The temperature dropped to 50 below zero and remained there the whole trip. The men rode and ran by turn, and the dogs were kept on the jump, but with infrequent stoppages. The 30-mile river was comparatively coated with ice, and they covered in one day going out what had taken them 10 days coming in. In one run they had made a 60-mile dash from the foot of Lake LaBarge to the White Horse Rapids, across Marsh, Tagish, and Bennett. 70 miles of lakes. They flew so fast that the man whose turn it was to run towed behind the sled at the end of a rope, and on the last night of the second week they topped White Pass, and the drop down the sea slope and the lights of Skagway and the shipping at their feet. It was a record run. Each day for 14 days, they had averaged 40 miles. For 3 days, Perrault and Francois threw chest up and down the main street of Skagway and were deluged with invitations to drink, while the team was the constant center of worship. Worshipful crowd was the constant center of a worshipful crowd of dog-busters and mushers. Then 3 or 4 Western badmen aspired to clean out the town, were riddled like timber boxes of their pains, and public interest turned to other idols. Next came official orders. Francois called Buck to him, threw his arms around him, wept over him, and that was the last of Francois and Perrault. Like other men, they passed out of Buck's life for good. All right. So now you need to add another incident to your chart. Add another incident to your chart. Take this time. What are some other incidents that just happened to help you out? Look at the incidents as far as how Buck was leading the team. And now, on your notebook paper, how do Buck's actions throughout Chapter 4 provoke decisions and reveal new insight into his character? So write a paragraph that includes a strong claim, logical reasoning, and relevant evidence to support the claim. You have to have these things: a strong claim, logical reasoning, and relevant evidence to support the claim. So in this lesson, you started reading and discussing Chapter 4 of The Call of the Wild. You also analyzed how incidents in the chapter provoked key decisions and revealed insight into Buck's character.